afternoon, everyone, and greetings to our Interagency Council for Ending the Achievement Gap. We hereby call this meeting on Wednesday, December 15th, 2021 to order. This is the last quarterly meeting of this calendar year, and I just want to thank each of you for
this conference will now be recorded.
All of the time and suggestions and work that you have all put in, and we really appreciate it. We've addressed the results statement and policy recommendations and the task force report. And with perfect timing, today's discussion will cover the 3 remaining topics and will complete our initial comprehensive review of the report. And before we adjourn today, I will go ahead and review next steps so that you have a sense of what you can expect in our 2022 meetings as we continue to pursue the very important work of this council. So thank you again for all the ways in which you have represented your agency in responding to the report and collaborating with each other to address opportunity gaps for the students of our beautiful state. And special thank you, of course, to the State Department of Education for their partnership and leadership and administrative support that they have provided to our council. So as usual, we have a tight schedule, so we are going to go ahead and get started, and it is our hope to finish by 3 or perhaps earlier, depending on how things go. So, Corey, if we could please move on to the roll call.
Okay, welcome everyone. Starting with the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities.
Stephen Hagedis here from Southern Connecticut State University, representing Board of Regents.
Thank you, Steve. Department of Administrative Services. Department of Children and Families. Department of Economic and Community Development. The Department of Housing. Department of Public Health.
Yes, it's Mario Garcia present.
Department of Social Services. The Judicial Branch.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Patricia Nunez. I'm a program manager over at the Judicial Branch Court Support Services Division and designee for Chief Justice Patrick Harris.
Thank you, Patricia. Office of Early Childhood. Office of Policy and Management.
Holly Williams, designee for Secretary Melissa McCaw.
I see the Department of Children and Families is here as well. Do you want to announce yourself? Matt Bowen is here. He's having technical issues right now, so that's in the chat. So State Department of Education.
Thank you, Kari. Shani Tucker, Commissioner here, and I know we have other colleagues on today as well.
Hi, John Prestonley, Division Director at SDE in School Health, Nutrition, and Family Services.
Good afternoon, Irene Parisi, Chief Academic Officer for the Department of Education.
Megan?
Good afternoon, I'm Megan Alubicki-Flick, and I am the Multilingual Learner, English Learner Consultant at the State Department.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, this is Dr. Melissa Hickey. I am the Reading Literacy Director at the State Department of Education.
And I'm Kari Sullivan-Custer with the State Department of Education, and my colleague Matt I forgot his name. Falconer is behind the scenes helping us out here, so he's here as well. Did we forget, and is there anyone here who was not announced who may have come in since we started? Just want to make sure we have a record of everyone who's here. All right. Thank you. Okay. Back to you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Kari. We're now going to take a moment to review the rest of today's agenda, which you see on the PowerPoint. What we want to do is, let's just make sure, we have just finished our opening remarks, just so you know where we are, and the roll call, and I'm going to soon ask for acceptance of the minutes as we review council updates since our last meeting. After the updates, we have a special presentation followed by agency responses to the last set of results, statements and policy recommendations. And all of today's topics fall under the umbrella of inside the schoolhouse. So that is why we will have Commissioner Russell Tucker lead today's discussions. And the three subjects that we will be looking at today include chronic absence, reading, and English language learners. Today we'll follow the same format as we have in our previous meetings, where we will read the overall results statement, address each policy recommendation, and seek additional ideas and comments from other council members. And we also plan to take real-time notes on the live screen as information is shared. And as usual, we want to encourage your active participation and engagement so that we can move the work of the council forward. So please don't hesitate to jump in on any subject, or if you have anything that you would like to add to our overall discussion. And finally, we ask that you be candid about any concerns that you might have with respect to the recommendations that we're looking at. As we previously have acknowledged, a lot has happened since the task force created its report, and we want to make sure that we appropriately address any concerns due to changed circumstances, fiscal issues, or any other reasons why we might want to flag recommendations for reconsideration. So after we review the policy recommendations, we will discuss next steps, including expectations for our 2022 meetings. And I will remind everyone of our meeting schedule for the next year before we adjourn today. And so before we jump into our work, does anybody have any questions about the agenda? All right, seeing no questions, we are going to move on to following up from our last meeting. I will let you know that we last met on September 22nd when we reviewed the role of time in closing the achievement gap. We also talked about narrowing the high-end opportunity gap to find missing advanced placement students. And finally, we discussed students in state care. The minutes from the September 22nd meeting were circulated to the council in draft for your review, and we did not receive any suggestions for edits of the minutes, but if you have any corrections or at this time, please let me know, and I'm looking to see if anybody has their hand raised. Okay, so seeing no one, are there any objections to accepting the minutes as final? Any objections? If not, seeing no objections, the September 22nd minutes are hereby accepted as final. And as we discussed in our last meeting, we anticipate following up with the council with additional information on two different topics. The first is with respect to development of higher education programs. that are consistent with the research and the work of the State Department of Education regarding the efficient use of time to facilitate student growth. And the second is with respect to the work of the Juvenile Justice Planning and Oversight Committee to implement DCF's administrative oversight of education for students in congregate care facilities.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah.
The implementation plan from DCF was sent to us earlier today, and I think we did get that around to the council members shortly before this meeting.
All right, and that is our General Counsel, Cherie Phoenix Sharp, in the Lieutenant Governor's office, who just made that comment. Thank you, Cherie. And so now I'd like to ask if there are any questions or other updates that anyone would like to share based on discussion from the September 22nd meeting. Anything else on the September 22nd meeting? So if not, if there are no other updates, we will now move on to today's special presentation.
I think Dr. Hegedus has his hands up.
Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
Dr. Hegedus, please go ahead.
Not a problem, Lieutenant Governor. Now, I just want to clarify. I had to go back to my notes. What I just sent to Cherie and Kari is the number of higher ed programs in the CSU system that have been approved in the past 5 years related to issues around education and mental health and counseling. And there have been 5 such programs, and I forwarded that. I see that I also commented on the use of time, and I will get back to you, get back to Cherie on that, because I think that's actually something within programs. But I did just send the list to you that the Board of Regents collated.
Very good, and Cherie will make sure that that information is
Just sent it.
all right. Excellent. So Commissioner Russell Tucker, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and please introduce our first guest presenter.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and it's great to see all the council members here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Hedy Chan, who is the founder and executive director of Attendance Works, a national and state level initiative aimed at advancing student success by addressing chronic absence. Hedy is a skilled presenter, facilitator, researcher, and writer. She co-authored the seminal report, Present, Engaged, and Accounted For, The Critical Importance of Addressing Chronic Absence in the Early Grades, as well as numerous other articles around student attendance. She's deeply committed to promoting 2-gen solutions to achieving a more just and equitable society. Hedy has spent more than 3 decades working in the fields of family support, family economic success and education, as well as child development. She served as a senior program policy officer at the Evelyn and Walter House Junior Fund and as a co-director of California Tomorrow. And Hedy's joining us from the West Coast. And so we're really thrilled to have her. In February of 2013, Hedy was named by the White House as a champion of change for her commitment to furthering African-American education. I personally must say I've worked with Hedy now, and Connecticut has worked with Hedy now for over a decade, addressing the issue of attendance. And thank you, Hedy, for willing to pick up the phone on the weekends when I need a thought partner to talk about our initiatives and where we need to go here. And it's really great to get a national perspective on this work when we think about COVID and the impact that it has had on attendance here where we continue to do the work. So we're really thrilled to have Hedy to circle back. I think our first council meeting under your leadership, Lieutenant Governor, we talked about chronic absence. So it's really kind of nice to almost close the circle here with a view from outside, which is a national perspective on attendance. With that, Hedy, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Russell Tucker. It has been my deep pleasure to partner with Connecticut. You, as we'll talk about in this presentation, I will both talk nationally, but I will talk about also some of the things that you have underway here. Lieutenant Governor and members of the Achievement Council, it is of the Achievement Gap Council. It's such a privilege and honor to join you. Why don't we go to the next slide, Kari? Let me start with laying out what we see as key ingredients of change for reducing chronic absence, because I think this is actually something that you all have emphasized in Connecticut, but it also is something that we think about nationally. We know that states and districts, in order to reduce chronic absence, they have to have actionable data. They have to start with positive engagement. This isn't a punitive approach, it's positive engagement. And building those strategic partnerships, ensuring that you have adequate and equitable resources, ensuring that you have shared accountability, and that you're building capacity throughout your state and your systems to and use this actionable data for positive engagement and strategic partnerships. Next slide. So what I want to comment on is that we've really appreciated the chance to watch what has happened in Connecticut. And let me start, because this work does start within your state Department of Education. We work with dozens of state departments of education across the country, but particularly have been impressed by what you've been able to put in place here in Connecticut. You did a number of things once COVID happened. Oh, wait, thanks, stay on that slide. That helped to ensure accurate, actionable data, maintaining a standard definition of attendance, publishing guidance about how to include in that. And you actually made sure that you were collecting it monthly, releasing it monthly, and making sure that districts had a chance to submit corrected data. That is huge because it starts with actionable data. And actually by publishing it broadly, you were creating that kind of shared accountability. You also used your virtual learning communities to build capacity around this. And you used the fact that you have a state team in place to look across the data, research best practices, and coordinate the work across the departments. Next slide. I also want to give much kudos to Connecticut because you are the first state that we know of that launched an initiative particularly addressed at figuring out how to have a thoughtful, strategic response to the growing levels of chronic absence. Now, in part, that is because you were one of the few states that already had good data. I think the first state to have good data to understand and recognize the depth of the challenge. So Governor Lamont's learning engagement and attendance program, home visitation program has been essential. And that reflects also your intentionality around creating adequate and equitable resources because you use data, not just on chronic absence, but poverty, enrollment, English language learners, to figure out which districts to invest in. You strategically use your COVID relief dollars. You are building capacity through your RESCs to support this work in your local districts. And one of the things that I especially appreciate about the LEAP program is the fact that you recognize that positive engagement isn't a one-time event. It's relationship building over time. So you're investing in multiple home visits so that you can really support families, particularly the most vulnerable. And because you were able to do this early, because you invested in launch, you launched in the summer. And one of the things that I've had the privilege of being on is phone call, there are Zoom calls or Zoom conference meetings where I've been able to hear from the home visitors in your districts who've talked about the benefit of being able to talk to families starting in August, before school started, when they were seen as a resource, and they built a relationship before the unanticipated chaotic reopening of schools happened across the country, where you're trying to reopen schools with a Delta variant. And the fact that they had built trust so that they could be seen as messengers who could assure them of the safety of returning to in-person schooling and getting connected to school-based and health-related resources in your community was essential. Next slide. And again, just so we knew last year was challenging, and you also are one of the few states that disaggregated your data. so you could see the full scope of the challenge in remote learning, which shows extraordinary high levels last year in your early grades, and then also a very troubling 9th grade spike. If you go to the next slide, you were also able to disaggregate your data, and what it showed was really deeply troubling patterns with your Latino and your African American Black students, that was both showing their extraordinary high levels in the early grades, and also that 9th grade spike, which is so troubling because that is a huge predictor of dropout later on, left unaddressed. Next slide. What we know is that across the country, attendance is worse. Everyone was hoping for a different reopening of school where we could help to start to make up for all of the lost learning opportunities during COVID, and that is not what happened, unfortunately, this fall. The surge in COVID cases increased the number of kids who are absent. It's a small portion that actually had COVID, much larger that were quarantined, and then a lot of confusion about how to ensure safety across the country. The return to in-person learning after so many months was probably even more difficult than everyone imagined. The lack of routines, but equally challenging, maybe more challenging, is that kids had not been around other kids. So the school climate issues have been enormous this fall. And then you still have so many older students who are struggling to balance school with increased family and work responsibilities, especially in communities hard hit by the pandemic, where they might have lost an important wage earner in their family, and they are still trying to be part of that fabric of their family, making ends meet. And chronic absence in these first months of school is especially problematic for learning, because learning is scaffolded, means kids may have lost out on core concepts that help them stay engaged and do better the rest of the year. And they also are didn't have as much chance to forge relationships with other peers and with teachers. And again, getting back into that routine has been extremely difficult. Next slide, please. And this is your data. Again, kudos to you I know this was not easy. I know this was not easy either for your state department or for your local districts to commute the monthly uploading of data, but it means you get to see your patterns unfold and take action early, and that is just positioning Connecticut such a different way. So you are seeing a slight increase. By the way, I will say other states and places saw less of an increase in chronic absence last year, more of an increase in the chronic absence this fall. I think that's because they did not have, as Connecticut did, as good of a definition of attendance in remote learning. You kept a pretty half a day. You had to show up for instruction, and you ensured consistency of that definition. So you captured more kids who were chronically absent last year in your data, which is allowing you to better target resources this year. You've also, one of the things I will mark on is that you're seeing some slight decreases. I know it's early, but you're seeing some slight, at least holding steady, if not slight decreases in kids with higher needs, whether that's your free and meal eligible kids, your English language learners, your kids experiencing homelessness, and a slight increase in chronic absence among the kids without such high needs. This is different from what we're starting to see nationally. Next slide, please. So this is the newest data that McKinsey has just released. And what we know about the national trends is that across the country, they're seeing much higher levels of chronic absence for low income and medium income. This high income data shows that they're staying, and actually there's another slide which I can make sure that you have available afterwards, which shows that in across the country, they're actually starting to see recovery among the most affluent kids. So that high income is actually a mix of incomes, but the kids over 150,000 or so, they're actually seeing lower levels of chronic absence, but it's the less affluent kids who are seeing higher increases. I say that because that is different from the slide that you just showed up earlier, where you're actually seeming to hold steady among your higher need kids. I know it's early, but I think that is actually promising and suggests that the targeting of your resources might be having some benefits in Connecticut.
Can I just jump in and say that, first of all, as I look at these slides, it highlights why Joe Biden took Miguel Cardona from our state at the national level, because our focus, you know, through Miguel when he was here and because of the governor's leadership, has been on keeping kids in school and keeping kids engaged and having a focus on equity. So one of the reasons that kids in socially vulnerable communities and communities of color were participating at rates they were participating at is because the governor got funding from the Dalio Foundation to make sure that kids in needy school districts got laptops to use at home, and where there were broadband gaps that, you know, they got internet access. And we were in constant communication with our mayors and first selectmen and boards of education and school superintendents to make sure that our kids were engaged. And so that was everything from making sure, you know, like superintendents had people knocking on doors of families whose kids weren't participating. So I know we're all looking at graphs and charts, but I can just tell you that it was the governor, the leadership of our SDE, making sure that kids had what they needed and families were supported so that kids could be learning. And it's not perfect, but you know, it's nice to know that what we were doing, you know, was targeted and we were doing the right thing. And in fact, we were leading the country and keeping our kids in school.
Absolutely. And I think those investments, both the strategic thinking about the investments, but that you actually had data to both think about which school districts and which kids to target to ensure that they had speaks volumes. And I certainly think it is no accident that our Secretary of Education was the former commissioner from Connecticut.
That's right. And I guess, and there's one other thing that I realized that I failed to mention, and that is that we were very intentional about targeting federal dollars to summer enrichment and catch-up in education programs, particularly for the neediest of our school districts. So we had places like New London and other needy areas where kids were going to school through the summer. And not only were they going to school, but they could go very early in the morning and stay till dinner time, have meals, do academic work, do recreation and enrichment. All of our museums, most of our museums and cultural attractions like Mystic Seaport and the Norwalk Aquarium were open for free so that Connecticut kids could go with adults. So we had a lot going on in the summer too that helped. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Absolutely. And I think you were out there early, and the strategic partnerships you have in place are essential. I'm going to just show some of the other, by contrast, I live in California. I'm calling in from California. We go to the next slide. This is what I'm seeing in my home state. Extraordinary increases in chronic absence at every level. That's what that blue line is.
I'm sorry, Hetty. For some reason, PowerPoint just restarted. Went away, so I'm going to pull it right back up. I love it. I'll be right back with the slide. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It is the challenges. I have them sitting in front of me. So while you're figuring it out, I will say, so that what you'll see in California, we're seeing doubling, tripling of chronic absence in some grades since pre-pandemic levels. So I do want to say, you know, I think the data on Connecticut is still early, but your data is showing trends that are quite different from the early data that I'm seeing in other places. And what I'm hoping is that the chronic absence data precedes your achievement and your academic data, just because it's faster to, you know, the data on academic progress is harder to acquire on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Thank you, Kari. Let's go to the next slide. So then I just want to talk for a moment about strategies to, we know, and you still have very high levels of chronic absence. I just think it's impressive and important to notice that you're moving in some of the right directions. And what we know from our work is that if you want to solve things, we have to really understand what factors are contributing to chronic absence. We know that COVID-19 has exacerbated certainly the chronic acute illness, but also the transportation challenges in communities are huge. The issue of aversion, especially for the kids where the school climate issues are still a challenge, and I know that's still a challenge, and I know that CD has been working with its school districts to address them, but school climate ones, because again, your kids, like everyone else, are coming back after long periods of not being around other kids, and the issue of engagement or disengagement, especially when you had so much in remote learning, though I do think your investments in ensuring high access to technology was important, because it was hard to keep kids engaged if they didn't have the technology and the internet connections. Those, I think, issues are even higher now than I think they ever were before. Next slide. And part of this is that when you see such high levels of chronic absence, you really have to examine what kinds of conditions of learning, positive conditions of learning, might not be in place. And in Connecticut in particular, I think you have to look at that particularly for your Latino and African American kids, where the levels are the highest. But we know that when we can assure kids physical and emotional health and safety, belonging, connection, support, academic challenge and engagement, adult, student, emotional, and ensure that you have the relationships that this can be turned around. And again, this is partly why I think the LEAP program has been an example of something so important. But also some of your other stands around how do you really get out there around the guidance around quarantining and screen and stay, and the way you're being very public about that has been so helpful. Next slide. What we're seeing, though, is a need to really reinvest in a multi-tiered approach, beginning with prevention and these foundational whole school supports. And if you can show the next slide, Kari. I want to talk about this for a moment, because I've been on a couple of your communities of practice with practitioners from your districts, has really resonated. The challenge of going back and forth during COVID between in-person instruction, virtual, back to in-person, and having quarantine means in many places these building blocks have been eroded, and you actually have to invest more in these building blocks. And I think for communities hardest hit by the pandemic, they're most eroded. So these things are what I think, what we're hearing our folks really are resonating, that they have to think about how are they going to add to this. I will say it is hard, because has to be a healthy learning environment for both school and staff for a school to work. And staff exhaustion levels are at a level I've never seen before in the country. Next slide. We have been talking about one of the values of kind of going back to the basics of what keeps kids in school. And this is work from Bob Balfan's, which might be a framework for thinking about what schools and partners and communities do. But kids, we got to really think about the connection to school so that we can make sure that kids will be in here for the long haul. because it might take 5-year plans to graduate, 6-year plans to graduate from high school. The level of learning loss for some kids is just significant. It's not a short-term fix. Keeping them in there is going to require this school connectedness. And kids are more connected when they know there's an adult in the school who cares, when they have a supportive peer group, when they're engaged in pro-social activities, and they feel welcome in school. And this is a pretty simple, if you will, formula for how we can work together to ensure those foundational supports are in place. Next slide. And in some cases, kids still need more tier 2. So your caring mentors, your student success plans, the expanded learning, which is why I think the summer learning program investments that Lieutenant Governor mentioned before are so important. That's going to be equally important again next year. Home visiting, which you've been investing in, small group supports. These are all kinds of things that we have to think about how to expand. Next slide. And one of the things that's going to have to be creative is how do we expand who this is? How do we make sure we're investing, whether that's through more people, which is, again, something that LEAP's done, but I think your expanded learning, other places can add more virtual opportunities and grouping kids with similar challenges together. I think how Connecticut thinks about continuing its strategic work, but even more how to continue to adapt, tailor, and scale its tier 2 supports. Next slide. And this is both about how do you integrate stuff within school buildings so they add to each other, and then you exchange external partners in this work. So I think that, and finally, the one thing we've found in our national work, and we're still playing around with these titles, but we're going to launch our attendance awareness campaign again. But we found that, especially with the overload of COVID-19, you really have to find a way to organize the work into manageable phases. We kind of have we're running a marathon. It's turning out to be, a 50-mile, not a 25-mile marathon or a 100-mile. But so we got to prepare for the marathon, but also not get people overwhelmed. So I think right now we're still in a support and connection mode. This spring, we have to still make sure kids feel that sense of belonging and that they're part of the school. You can use your summer to really promote engagement and recovery. And then we're going to have to think again about how we get to the fall to create community at school. How do you create doable chunks to mobilize the within school and external partners that you need is part of how we have a strategy for for implementing with quality and getting to scale.
So Hetty, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I don't know if there members have any additional questions.
Thank you so much. Sorry, my mic was still off. Apologies. Thank you so much, Ms. Chang. We want to say thank you to you for your presentation and to our State Department of Education for inviting you to speak today. And we want to applaud you for your comments. And you may recall that in one of our first meetings, before we started reviewing each of the policy recommendations as a group, Commissioner Russell Tucker shared information with us on our progress about addressing chronic absenteeism. And of course, this was pre-COVID. And so that's why I really appreciate the commissioner circling back on that today as our first subjects. And the other two subjects she's going to review are reading and English language learners. So without further ado, I'm happy to go ahead and turn the agenda back over to Commissioner Russell Tucker.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And again, thank you to Hetty. I wanted this group to know just the commitment that we've had to this work. As I said, we've been working with Hetty for over a decade, which gave us the foundation, I believe, from which to build. But, when COVID hit and we started looking at attendance and collecting the data, we had the privilege of authoring an article with Corey Sullivan, who's driving here, and Hetty. And the title of the article was Chronic Early Absence, What States Can Do. And we talked about Connecticut's 6 high-impact strategies to improve attendance. And one of the strategies was cultivating champions to build a state-level infrastructure. And so we wrote about this council back then, about the work, about the work that this council does and the importance of cultivating champions. And we talked about the council works to align efforts across education, early education, health, housing, child welfare, juvenile justice, social services, and other state agencies. And so that was true then as it is now. And so, Lieutenant Governor, I appreciate your ongoing support and for this council, and that this is one of the topics that we move forward with. So thank you very much. And Hetty, again, thank you for all your work. And so we're going to move through as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, inside the schoolhouse, and so chronic absence. And the results statement, all students will attend school at least 90% of the school year. And the people now closest to the work after all this time, Corey Sullivan, who does this work here with John. So we will go through the policy recommendations very quickly. We won't certainly read word for word, and then update you on where we are. Actually, as I was looking at this, a part of this is just saying yay, yay. It's a little bit of a victory lap with the work that's done. Again, that we have a lot of work to do, but we are able to take the steps that we've taken based on that foundation on which we're building. So we'll start with this. Corey and John, I'm going to turn it over to you just to work through this with us.
Okay, thank you, Charlene. It's my pleasure to talk about chronic absence. It's what I do and love. So the first policy recommendation is around public awareness and build public awareness of chronic absence and why it matters across schools and communities. And this is something that we are doing on a regular basis. The most recent chronic absence and attendance campaign was this fall when we did our back to school campaign that was aimed at families. We continue to use our data to geographically target promotions in the areas where they were needed. It was done multilingual on social media, radio, and TV, and we have our backtoschoolconnecticut.org. However, the public awareness is done much deeper than that through our professional development activities. We have webinars, we have peer learning networks. We've had several attendance symposiums that have been statewide campaigns. Commissioner Russell Tucker speaks regularly at state and national conferences around attendance. And in Connecticut, we are very familiar with chronic absence at this point, I think. For attendance tracking, we track individual student attendance and absences in state longitudinal databases. Connecticut launched a next generation accountability system, and our indicator number 4 is on the district report cards and measured in the accountability system. Reports are issued on EdSite, not only annual reports of chronic absence data and trends by district, school, and student groups, grades, and such. We have our early indication tool, which allows schools to monitor student progress over time to see if there's indications that they may go off track. We now, since COVID, have our monthly attendance data collection as the Hetty Chang reference, which has been extremely helpful in our planning and for districts in their monitoring of regular attendance. You can see there's a lot more things that are happening around attendance tracking, but there's a lot that goes into the quality of attendance, a lot of training and resource guidance for districts so that we know that people are consistently tracking attendance across districts. Next slide, please. Standard definition. So Public Act 15-2025 really locked in the chronic absence definition in Connecticut, and this was done for a chronically absent child, means a child has missed 10% or more of days enrolled in their school at any given time. So right now, a student who might be chronically absent, when we're looking at that data, if there's been 60 days of school right now, that student would have missed 6 or more days of school to be chronically absent. And that's who we want. That's when we want schools to start monitoring those students, checking in with them, seeing what's happening. And so we have a standard definition of chronic absence. We've had one for a very long time, and it was codified there in the Connecticut General Statutes. However, during COVID, in the fall of 2020, Connecticut maintained that standard definition of which is being in school a half a day or more, whether in your remote learning or you're in school learning. You had to perform a half a day's worth of school to get credit for that day. And there was guidance for that and lots of training and technical assistance provided. Any questions about that? Chronic absence reports regularly calculate and share chronic absence data statewide. Beginning in the fall of 2020, we began collecting attendance data monthly and sharing that monthly on EdSite, our data portal. For probably 5 or 6 years now, chronic absence data has been available annually on EdSite through our next generation accountability system as well. And the profile and performance reports, which are the school and district report cards, all include chronic absence data. Reports to families, that's pretty much the same. All of that information is available to families. However, I do want to say this is directly like making sure families know where to go and hear about their child's attendance. And so we've brought in, for professional development, peer networking opportunities, the webinars, we've brought in Dr. Todd Rogers, who's a behavioral scientist out of Harvard Kennedy School, who created the research-based, they're called nudge letters, and it's really important how letters and information is worded that go out to families. So we've provided a lot of attention and presentations around that for districts, so that they're sending home letters or communicating with families in a way that's effective and can be read, instead of something that's very wordy and starts out with a statute, how to write that letter that a parent will read and actually act on the information.
I just want to jump in quickly on that last, if you go back to the last slide. Yeah, I just want to underscore the importance of that first bullet in the first box there, that we started collecting through the performance office and through the commissioner's leadership. This is critically important. So if you remember what was happening in the fall of 2020, classes were canceled in March of 2020. This is the beginning of the school year, where many districts were remote and kids were remote. So we wanted to make sure that we were collecting real-time data so that we knew which kids were not in school, so kids were not falling through the cracks, and that districts could take action right away to support those students. And so this was super critical. And I think Hetty mentioned that I believe we were one of the first, if not the first state in the nation to do this. And it just informed all of the work that we're doing in real time, rather than waiting till the end of that school year and then looking back and see what we needed to do.
Thank you, John. Okay, and the other thing down here at the bottom is part of that Public Act back in 2015 was to create a guidance document for schools and districts on reducing chronic absence. And we have a very comprehensive prevention intervention guide for schools that goes through everything soup to nuts around reducing chronic absence.
And Corey, I'd just add, just for the benefit again of the council, that was work that the council did extensively in making sure that this guide was prepared and ready for schools.
And then this policy recommendation is around school improvement plans, including chronic absence data. And this is absolutely a requirement of many of our funding applications, including our Alliance and Opportunity Districts. We look at school climate and culture, our Title I applications, and Commissioners Network School, so that attendance and discipline data and those types of things are taken into consideration as they're doing their planning and their budgeting for state and federal dollars. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that as far as the school improvement plans.
You can move forward, Corey.
Okay. Capacity building, I just couldn't get enough on this slide. Apparently, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. We have statewide conferences. We have multiple opportunities through our Alliance districts and NetStat forums to promote and disseminate good learning and best practices around attendance. Once COVID started, we launched 2 peer networking opportunities in sort of a tiered fashion. We have Talk Tuesdays are offered every other Tuesday for all of our Alliance and LEAP districts. to come together in an informal kind of drop in to learn about what's happening in different districts around attendance, what's new. And then we have our attendance engagement community of practice monthly for all district leaders who work on attendance. And we're happy to say CIRC and Attendance Works are also helping us to design those and promote those. And then in the spring of 2020, we have our learner engagement and attendance program, and there's lots of training aligned with that and peer networking so that we have home visitors who are doing a good job with creating trusting relational relationships with families in a way that is successful for them. Okay, and
then we have one final slide.
Yeah, the interagency resource allocation coordination. So we provide guidance and support to districts on the establishment of district attendance teams that include community and family voices through written guidance, presentations, and technical assistance. An example of this type of partnership is the LEAP program, where many of the districts are using their community-based organizations to provide the home visitors. As we know, districts are short on staff, and there's a lot going on in the schools, so those community-based organizations are able to step in and help with the home visits and developing relationships with those families. Okay.
So thank you, Kari. I know that was a high level and a quick overview of that. And before we move on to reading, as is our process here, we want to make sure we open this up for any additional commentary from members. And I see Hetty is still here, so I don't know if members have any specific questions for her as well. We constantly say here that attendance is a precursor to engagement, and engagement is a precursor to learning. Being present matters, and we continue to be focused on doing that here in Connecticut, as you've heard. So questions or comments from the membership? Lieutenant Governor, I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we move into the other, which is reading.
No, I just want to add one thing, Commissioner, because I was thinking about the school being actively engaged with families. And I just have to say, one thing that sticks with me is one of my friends who was a principal of one of the high schools in Hartford before he became a school superintendent in another high need area. And I remember when he was starting his job, he had been a state representative and a teacher, and then was an administrator. And what he did was he door knocked in Hartford himself, every family that had kids at this Hartford high school. And so as I was listening to all of the different efforts about absenteeism, I kept thinking about this this principle. I think about in my hometown of Middletown, which is in some areas very socially vulnerable, where the McDonough school principal will send out a team and they door knock every family before that elementary school starts. And there just is no substitute in building relationships with families, because it goes to every one of the points that Ms. Chang was talking about: community engagement, families feeling supported. All of those things I think are really important. So we're one of the smaller states, so I think we have a tendency to just be ultra family focused, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've been successful. And I just wanted to say that to avoid chronic absence, we need more of that hands-on engagement with families.
Absolutely, Lieutenant Governor. I think that is awesome, and that is the work that folks continue to do, and sharing best practices across our systems. When Kari has her talk Tuesdays, that's bringing different leaders from our different districts together, so they're hearing what's working and walking away with really great ideas of what that they can do. So we continue to do this work. It's critically important for us, having folks like Hedy and other national leaders connected to us that we can learn from as well. Kari talked about Todd Rogers, Dr. Rogers out of Harvard, always making sure that we are connecting to what's the best practices, the best research-based practices. And the last thing I'll add to this, you'll see when we talk about relationships and the traumas, that social emotional well-being is so critically important. And that is why we've constantly talked about the well-being of our students and also the well-being of our staff during this time as we continue to think about the connections that's so critically important. And so I constantly now am reminding folks at our districts that we made sure that social emotional mental health support was one of the priorities for investing our federal funds into the state. And our districts have responded over $183 million of the federal relief fund that districts have programmed across our ESSER 1 and our ESSER 2 and our ARP ESSER funding is towards social emotional and mental health supports of student and staff. And so we recognize that that's not a disconnect when we think about making sure kids are in school and engaged in learning. So we can talk about that forever, but we have to move on to the next priority. But thank you all very much for that. So Lieutenant Governor, I'll move on to the next, if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you again, Hedy, for being here. Our next result statement is on, if you would move to the next slide, Kari, is on reading. And every child will read at goal by the end of the 3rd grade. This was in 2014 when that result statement was made, so it's updated a little bit. We're talking about reading on grade level. But another area of ongoing commitment from the agency about reading. And so I'm pleased to have our Chief Academic Officer, Irene Parisi, here. We'll do the same thing as we did before, very high level on what policy recommendations are and where we are in terms of our updates so far. And then we'll take questions or comments from our members. So with that, Irene.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. And also with me is Dr. Melissa Hickey that might add additional information as she's been here providing leadership that predates myself. And so I just want to recognize her so she can also answer questions. The next group of slides will address, I think, approximately 15 policy recommendations. This slide and the next 2 slides show where we have been since 2012 with the Connecticut literacy model or the CK3LI implementation to grow that tier 1 system of support for districts for the grades pre-K through 3. If you can go to the next slide, Kari. We've tried to outline the work that has been present and ongoing. And we also included here too what the legislation had stated, and this will also show a progression of where we are now and what has been mandated here. And then in the next slide, what is important to notice in that second bullet, what has been outlined is that the Connecticut or the CK3LI, which is now being called the Connecticut Literacy Model, that was implemented and piloted in our Alliance districts, that there was a lot of growth made by our students. And so it's been a proven proof of concept, and we're continuing to do that work through the Connecticut Literacy Model. And in the next slide, you'll notice that we reference the Senate bill, which was recently passed 1202, which will help us establish the Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success, where this work will be present and ongoing. As Commissioner Russell Tucker stated, that we are committed to this work. And we are in the process of hiring a director to oversee this center, again, to continue to develop that tiered system of support for all of our districts so that they can achieve that result statement. Next slide. So in this policy recommendation of developing a reading director, oh no, I'm sorry. Thank you. Utilizing the Connecticut blueprint, again stated here is where we have been with the legislation, and the blueprint has been utilized and provided a great framework. The third bullet here, there's a lot of research embedded in that particular document, and it has helped revise many standards and work and position statements moving forward. And I think that's just an important piece to note here. And certainly as we continue our work with the Center of Literacy Research and Reading Success, we will continue to bring that blueprint research forward and make updates as needed.
Irene, I'll just pause here as you reference the Literacy Center, just to let everyone know that based on this past legislative session, that we're standing up 2 new offices in the agency addressing literacy, one dyslexia and the other on reading. And so you can see we've started way back then, but this is evolving. And those 2 offices are being established in the agency right now based on this past legislative session.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. And that's where we reference the hiring of a director, and also it's deeply embedded there in that bullet there, but we are currently also creating a position statement that does align with the science of reading, which was in Senate Bill 1202. Next slide, please, thank you. So the policy recommendation of increasing a pool of literacy specialists, as noted here, the work that has been present and ongoing in developing partnerships with our university partners and ensuring that we are providing those alternative routes to accessing that certification so that we have highly qualified and impactful adults building those relationships to support students in their ability to read to learn and learn to read. Next slide. So addressing time and content quality together in reading, here the legislation and providing that intensive reading instruction program. You'll notice in the 3rd bullet, as we've referenced already, this is continuing and evolving through that public act, so that as the Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success continues to build, that this will be part of the ongoing work through that center, ensuring that statewide all districts have access to an intensive reading, or all students have access to an intensive reading instruction program with highly qualified individuals, and that we are working in partnership with the Connecticut Literacy Model and then some to continue this work. Next slide. Again, we keep coming back to Senate Bill 1202 because that has a lot outlined there to ensure that these policy recommendations, or the work of each policy recommendation, will continue. Next slide. So regarding sufficient instructional time, always a question at the local level. What we've outlined here is that it does remain within the local control of districts designing their master schedules. However, we have board-approved guidance to assist the districts in making those decisions. And I would say, on the whole, many districts have recognized the need for increased instructional minutes to support their learners. Again, reading to learn, and then, or learning to read and reading to learn. I think districts have learned more about what is grade appropriate and age appropriate as well, to ensure that students have the maximum instructional time in their reading block. But we did outline here that at least 90 to 120 minutes daily is recommended in that beyond the blueprint. Next slide. The requirement of routine formative assessments in reading for all students in K through 3. This work is present and ongoing, and it's also lifted again, brought back in Senate Bill 1202. This is an area that Dr. Melissa Hickey continues to lead. So if she's okay, she can share some current updates on that work. Melissa, if you don't mind unmuting and sharing, that would be great.
Sure, thank you so much. So every year what we do is we take in suggestions from districts as to what assessments should be examined and researched, and we have an internal team that looks at that and ensures that the assessments align to the science of reading and align to the legislative requirements, especially around the dyslexia piece. Then we bring those to the Board of Education for them to review and adopt, and we post those for the districts. This will continue under the new legislation, which, as Irene mentioned, that it continues in that Senate Bill number 1202. We do not take recommendations from publishing companies.
And Dr. Hickey, if you could continue in the next slide, and the policy recommendation speaks to collecting statewide longitudinal data. So if you could share an update there.
Sure, absolutely. So those districts that we feel are the ones in most need, which are opportunity districts, are required to submit their data from the assessments. These assessments happen in the fall, winter, and spring. They are to input their data and share with the state, and then we use those data to provide the supports that Irene mentioned previously through the Connecticut Literacy Model and the CK3LI.
Thank you. And I think as we continue to establish the work of the center, there might be a broader vision for this work. Kari, if you could back up a slide, I think we missed one. Thank you. So in this policy recommendation, commitment to the school leadership and their knowledge, this is front and center in, as stated here in the second bullet. It's present and ongoing, but really, again, elevated so that the center can be responsible for implementing professional learning and other resources and support systems to our superintendents so that they can truly be the literacy leader of this work and that it is systemic throughout the district. So again, Public Act 21-2 in that particular section provides additional guidance on ensuring that we are building those strong, committed school leaders and their knowledge on K-3 literacy and the science of reading. So that speaks to our future. Next slide.
Irene, could you just also mention the implementation, the council?
Absolutely, thank you for that. So as legislated, there is the required appointment of members for the Reading Leadership Implementation Council. And that membership will provide guidance and work in advisory capacity, but also with the director of the center to assist in decision-making, assist in review, provide additional guidance from the field so that we are making the best decisions possible and building out the work of the center, but also the resources for each district. If there's an interest, the membership of the council does begin on page 631 and 632 if you'd like to read those that were actually appointed to the council. Okay, now we're going. Okay, I'm just watching. Thank you. I think we might have gone. I'm not sure where we are now. Sorry.
Did I go too far? All right, so we've done this one. Instructional minutes. I'm going in the wrong direction, Dr. Hickey.
I think the next recommendation was holding each district and school accountable for reading achievement.
Yes.
Okay. Hold these. Here it is. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So here we're outlining how this is very important to us, and that already within our next generation accountability system, the first indicator is about English language arts. And we use it using our state summative assessments here, which are administered in grades 3 through 8 and 11. And it's how we hold our districts accountable for not only implementing the best instructional practices related to literacy, but also a standards aligned and highly aligned curriculum so that students can demonstrate their learning through this assessment. Next slide. The creation of incentives for teachers who consistently improve their reading outcomes. What we've included here is what has been legislated, and what we've noted here, despite the lack of appropriations to fund an incentive program. However, we do reach out to different districts, their leadership, and their teams to publicly recognize them for their literacy efforts and use them as models of best practices. We've done a series of different events to award certificates and ask them to present at different conferences, as well as to different committees of the State Board of Education. Dr. Hickey, I don't know if there's anything I overlooked here. If you'd like to share, since you have led this work.
Thank you so much. Sure. So, like you said, although we didn't have the money that was allocated, we did want to find ways to recognize those strategies, practices, and individuals who were incorporating things aligned to the science of reading. And in this way, we could elevate those practices and share with other districts. So as our Chief Academic Officer referenced, that you'll see where we've done awards, where we've publicly recognized individuals in schools. We have asked people to present on these promising practices, and it's always been received very well. So thank you.
Thank you. And the next slide. Policy recommendation with regard to performance bonuses. What we're listing here is what is stated in the legislation, and I think that this is work that we still discuss, and certainly with our talent office, to see how we can provide other avenues for teachers to be recognized for their performance. Next slide. So what we've outlined here, and again, I have to recognize Dr. Hickey and her work that has come before me in standing up ReadCon, this statewide professional learning series, based on the teacher reading survey. So the Foundations of Reading survey is something that we administer through a partner for districts so that we can understand, and that the teachers can understand, where are they with their ability and their knowledge and skill set in the implementation of literacy instruction. And we really try to message that this is an excellent opportunity for them to personalize their professional learning and access these resources that we have provided, again, in partnership with UConn, and others, so that they can really be on a path of a growth approach and grow those skills so that they can be the best teacher of literacy for their students. Next slide. So I think this is a continuation of what I said earlier in the previous slide. And you'll note here by the number of teachers that have participated in ReadCon, we did pivot to more of a virtual approach, which the feedback has been phenomenal in that they can access this anytime and anywhere. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. And finally, these last two statements, again, we are outlining the legislation here and creating a partnership with parents on literacy. And you'll note here, referencing back to Senate Bill 1202, where it is highlighted, a component of the work of the center is to provide for family engagement. So we're excited about that work. And then the last one, developing 2 generational strategies where parents and children are supported. This work is present on and ongoing to provide for that initiative for the 2 generational service delivery. So these are the updates of the reading work specific to each recommendation, and we are here to answer any questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you both. And so open it up for the members for additional commentary or questions.
Dr. Hagen.
Yeah, hello. I would just, this is all wonderful work just from also my personal institution. I shared this with Irene recently. We've just been approved at Southern to have a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. The Board of Regents approved that just about a month ago, and thank the Commissioner for her support as well. And within that center, there will be a literacy clinic, and I think we would welcome partnerships to sustain some of the work with the Department of Ed around local, either in-service training or local community work with our families. So a little bit of self-promotion, I apologize, but I'm really proud that we can have a new Center for Excellence in the state on that area.
Great to know.
Other comments, questions? And so thank you for sharing that. As we've always talked about, all hands on deck here. So being able to connect with you on that as we're setting up the council, the center, and also getting the work started for the council to be able to share that with you. There is, if not already done, a dedicated page on our website to that with the membership that will all be there. And meetings are, if they're virtual, they're recorded so that the members of the public and others can have a window into those meetings, the minutes, and be able to see what's happening there. So it is a way to make sure that we're all coordinated across all our systems. So appreciate that. Lieutenant Governor, anything else before we move on to the final result statement?
Go right ahead.
All right, perfect, thank you. And so the next, again, inside the schoolhouse, the result statement is English language learners will become fully proficient in English. And I know we've updated the language since this was written in 2014, but I'll leave that to my colleague, Megan Alubicki-Flick. She introduced herself earlier, who is our consultant who is working on our issues with multilingual learners, providing leadership there. And so with that, we'll do the very same thing with the rest of the slides. We'll summarize the policy recommendation and then do an update of where we are in our progress that we're making. So with that, Megan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon again. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you about the great work that is going on behalf of these amazing children in our state. I will begin talking about some of the work that we're doing around culturally relevant and culturally sustaining practices and supporting our educators in an effort to serve our students. I'd first like to begin by noting that as happens in education from time to time, acronyms shift and change. And I'd like to note an important one that is underway at the state with regard to the students that we're discussing here. While these students were previously referred to as English language learners and most recently as English learners in federal law, we are choosing to move toward a more assets-based term of multilingual learners, which acknowledges the strengths of the students and the assets that they bring. So you'll hear me speaking about multilingual learners, but you'll also see references to English learners. And I'll be using the two terms synonymously with an understanding that we're moving as a state agency toward that more assets-based term. I'd like to highlight the ESSA Evidence-Based Practice Guide on Multilingual Learners, which we've recently renamed. That resource is a nice professional learning resource for districts, for school and district leaders, and for teachers. And it highlights research that is proven successful for our multilingual learners across several domains in the educational setting. So this is a nice focused resource that enables our educators to go and kind of one-stop shop to high leverage strategies that research shows are effective and they can then embed these research-based strategies with intentionality in their content. Go to the next slide, please. So for this, the policy recommendation is around engaging in an audit of services for our bilingual and English language learner programs. Those language instruction programs are in the vast majority of our school districts across the state and look very differently across contexts. So again, I'm noting the ESSA evidence-based practice guide that I just noted. The high leverage practices focus on systems, instructional practice, professional learning, and extended learning. But in those 4 areas, those 4 domains, the document highlights the research-based practices that have proven particularly effective for our multilingual learners. We also have an additional tool called our English Learner Checklists. These resources have been developed to be utilized as an internal self-assessment for districts and schools, but also potentially as an external evaluation tool by which schools, districts, or external evaluators can look deeply into the programs that are serving our multilingual learners, both the language instruction programs and the broader programs and initiatives that impact schools and districts and impact the supports for our multilingual learners, using the checklist as a guidepost to ensure that we know what we're doing well and what can be done better going forward. Next, please. The next policy recommendation relates to the development of model curriculum. This is particularly exciting as this work is currently underway, and what I find particularly impactful for our multilingual learners is that we have, with intentionality, infused the topic of our multilingual learners and how we can promote their success across the content area curriculum development process, both through people who are experts in serving these students, being a part of these curricular the curriculum development groups and the work, as well as by infusing our Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards into the curricular documents that we are developing. This ensures that our multilingual learners are prioritized right at the outset, rather than being seen as an appendix or an afterthought. They are absolutely critically important in this process, and that will be evidenced in the curriculum that is subsequently developed. This policy recommendation relates to training for school-based personnel, and there's exciting work in this area as well. We have an ongoing professional learning program that we have developed in partnership with our regional education service centers. That series of professional learning activities is called the Pathways to Success for Multilingual Learners, and it is a web-based, on-demand, free collection of trainings that are open source and accessible to all. These trainings are not solely focused on our service providers that are English learner or multilingual learner experts, such as TESOL teachers or bilingual teachers, but rather are primarily focused on generalists. So they're really intended for our grade level, mainstream, content area teachers, our instructional coaches, our school building leaders. And they offer an opportunity to familiarize and dig deeply into the strategies and effective processes and procedures that really work and leverage our multilingual learners and support their needs. Our next topic is with regard to assessment. I'm pleased to say that we have developed a guidance document that is called the Equitable Assessment Practices for English Learners in Connecticut that really serves as another one-stop shop for understanding how we can be equitable and how we can be very thoughtful and intentional in our supports for multilingual learners and our assessment of their effectiveness as well as their progress in both developing academics and concurrently developing their language proficiency. Additionally, all of our multilingual learner students annually take the LOS Links assessment. That is an English language proficiency assessment that measures all 4 of the domains of language, including speaking, listening, reading, and writing. This provides critical information about the growth of these students and their ability to access content area instruction and learning. Next slide, please. With regard to our youngest multilingual learners, who are also referred to in the early childhood space as dual language learners, which acknowledges that they're also in the process of learning English while learning another language, the Office of Early Childhood has partnered with the WIDA Early Years organization. The WIDA Early Years offers high-quality professional learning that develops and grows the capacity of teachers, schools, districts, and also our internal capacity at the Office of Early Childhood to ensure that we are effectively and intentionally serving our youngest multilingual learners, as well as connecting with their families. The next policy recommendation relates to alliance funding and a focus of that alliance funding to serve our multilingual learners. Alliance funding certainly can be used to serve our multilingual learners, and alliance districts are encouraged to allocate resources, both alliance funding and other funding sources, to serve these students. Internally at the State Department of Education, staff collaborate closely and work very closely with colleagues in our turnaround office who serve as the point people for our connections with the alliance districts to ensure that our multilingual learners are considered and are prioritized in the improvement efforts at the district and the school levels. Next slide, please. It was very exciting that the bilingual statute was amended earlier this year. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. So the policy recommendation here, I'm jumping to the notes. Policy recommendation is that we are supporting our pre-service teachers and supporting alternative routes to certification. So again, very exciting. Our bilingual statute was amended earlier this year to remove some of the barriers to bilingual certification. Frankly, we know that we have a very, very shallow pool of bilingual educators in our state, and we have a pervasive shortage of these teachers. We have wonderful teachers in that pool. There just are not very many swimmers. And so how can we get more teachers in place? By removing some of the barriers while maintaining rigorous expectations. The adjustments and amendments to the statute have done just that. So we are very eager to see a growing number of highly qualified bilingual candidates going forward. Additionally, we have an alternate route to certification for teachers of English learners, the ARC-TEL program, which intends to address the pervasive shortage areas of TESOL and bilingual. So not only bilingual is a pervasive shortage area, but also the certification teaching English to speakers of other languages is another shortage area. The alternate route program addresses this shortage by providing a 10-month cohort hybrid-based program at a low cost. And this has been eagerly supported by many school districts that have actually invested in cohorts of their teachers attending the program together, so that they're building capacity both of TESOL and bilingual specialists, but also developing the capacity of those teachers that wish to remain in their general education content areas, while possessing the knowledge that they need to better serve the multilingual learners in that context. And then additionally, the State Department of Education continues to have dual language bilingual programs as a priority, and we continue to build our own internal capacity to support districts in their efforts to develop those programs. Next slide. Oh, looks like you're muted.
Thank you, I'm muted. I wanted to jump in to, so there's one more policy recommendation, but as you were talking about getting more swimmers in, I thought about the fact, I know, Lieutenant Governor, we have our Afghan arrivals here in our state, and I know Megan is a part of that conversation that we're having there as well. And so it's just something that it is a part of our landscape as we think about that pool of educators that can be available for all our families.
Great point.
Thank you for sharing that. And we are very lucky in Connecticut to have a very linguistically multilingual population. And so we continue to commit to serving those folks and maintaining and cultivating language and really bringing those linguistically multilingual folks into the fold as educators of the future. And then the final policy recommendation is regard to implementing results-based strategies for children in state care. And we've addressed that through data management and reporting systems. I heard Kari earlier reference data management, and this is an area that our data management and reporting systems additionally are supportive of our students. So both EdSite Secure, EdSite, the public school information system, all of those allow for both aggregate and disaggregated analysis of individual student and student group needs. And multilingual learners are infused throughout those data systems so that we can get data that we need in order to serve our students. Additionally, the State Department of Education regularly is exchanging data with DCF for students in foster care so that critical data can be assessed and accessed for use by caseworkers to meet those students' needs. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. The last thing I'll just have you, which is not on our slide, but just for our members here and those watching the presentation today, to talk about the seal of biliteracy.
Absolutely. So this is a particularly exciting initiative that our agency is committed to and even recommitting to just as we speak. So the seal of biliteracy has been in place since it was signed into statute in 2017 in Connecticut. It enables students at the high school level to demonstrate proficiency in English and one or more other language. And in doing so, this provides students with an accolade and acknowledgement of their multilingualism. It's exciting because it's not only intended for students that are world language learners who are native English speakers that have participated in world language as a part of their educational program, but also for our multilingual learners, our former designated multilingual learners, and students who have that possess a heritage language and have maintained and cultivated it. Essentially, the seal through the SEAL, it doesn't matter how you have developed that proficiency. It could be through talking to your grandmother or going to a Saturday school, or really digging in and getting to know a language through an app, or through a world language pathway, or through being a multilingual learner and developing English and maintaining your heritage language. But it provides an acknowledgement of that aptitude for our students. And annually, since inception, we have seen more students attempt and receive the SEAL, more multilingual learners and former multilingual learners attempt and receive the SEAL, more districts participate in the initiative, and overall a higher number that is annually growing of students getting this great accolade.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. Questions, comments, further commentary from our members on this result statement? Hearing and seeing none, Lieutenant Governor, I really just want to thank the staff. As you can see, a lot of work occurring here, and I wanted you to hear from and meet the folks who are behind the work, on boots on the ground, doing this work closely. So I appreciate them for being here today to give more fine-grained detail to the work that's happening. So with that, Lieutenant Governor, I am turning things back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you to each of our presenters. You each did a fantastic job. We are very grateful. So now we're going to talk about our next steps. So we have on the screen the 2022 calendar year quarterly meeting schedule, March 11th, June 7th, September 16th, and December 13th. And we intend to continue to hold our meetings from 1 to 3, as we have been doing. We'll have that for our March meeting to talk about our preparation for that. The State Department of Education has agreed to lead a discussion on behavioral health. Please let us know by February 11th if there's anything that you'd like to contribute to this subject, and we will be sure to coordinate with you on presenting. We are planning to invite some of our non-council member agencies, like the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, Department of Emergency Services, and Public Protection, to share on this subject as well. For future meetings, I would ask that the council members keep 3 things in mind. First, we've reviewed a lot of information over the past year, and there are many existing programs that we've talked about that address the overall goal of this council to close the opportunity gap. So please be proactive about reaching out to our office when there are program updates and measured progress on any of these programs that we've been looking at. As you have seen from these meetings, the collaboration between agencies on these subjects allows us to be more effective and efficient. And I want to make sure that we're mindful of what's working versus what may need alternative considerations. Second, please bring to my attention when there's anything new in the works consistent with the goals of the council, especially now as we are planning for federal funding in our COVID recovery efforts. It's really important that we all stay connected in supporting our most vulnerable communities, which includes, of course, our at-risk youth. So I want to make sure that every agency that touches the work of this council knows what resources and opportunities are available in furtherance of this priority. And finally, if you're aware of proposed legislation relevant to our work, please do let us know. In addition to our annual reports to the legislature, we want to engage our legislators directly on what we are doing and the potential impact of legislative efforts. So I am sure that as we begin our meeting in March, we're going to have a lot more legislative proposals that may be available to us that are not now, but I do anticipate seeing a lot. So we'll keep an eye on that. I wanted to stop there to see if there are any comments or questions about what our next steps are as a council. All right. Well, if not, I want to wish everyone safe and happy holidays, and ask that we go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Interagency Council for Ending the Achievement Gap, and see everyone next year.